Hello and welcome, dear sleepy friend. Tonight I'm so glad you're here. In this video, I'll be sharing a collection of 5 gentle Christmas tales, all soft, comforting, and perfect for easing into rest on a quiet winter night. These stories are meant to help you unwind, settle your thoughts, and drift off peacefully as the world grows calm around you. Before we begin, let's take a little moment to relax together. Go ahead and make yourself comfortable, whether you're tucked into bed or resting somewhere cozy and warm. Let your shoulders soften. Let your jaw loosen just a little. And take a slow, deep breath in and a long, gentle breath out. Imagine the soft hush of a snowy night around you, the quiet sparkle of stars above, and the comforting glow of a warm light shining from a nearby window. There's nothing you need to do now, nowhere you need to be, just this peaceful moment and the soothing stories ahead. Let your breath fall into an easy rhythm. Let the day melt away and allow yourself to settle into the stillness of this winter night. And when you're ready, let's begin. Jimmy Scarecrow led a sad life in the winter. His greatest sorrow was having nothing to do. He liked to be useful, and in winter, he was of no use at all. He wondered how many such lonely winters he would have to endure. He was a young Scarecrow, and this was his very first one. He was strongly made, and although his wooden joints creaked a little when the wind blew, he did not grow in the least unsteady. Every morning, when the wintry sun peered like a hard yellow eye across the dry corn stubble, Jimmy felt sad, but at Christmas time, his heart nearly broke. On Christmas Eve, Santa Claus came in his sleigh, piled high with presents, urging his team of reindeer across the field. He was on his way to the farmhouse where Betsy lived with her Aunt Hannah. Betsy was a very good little girl with smooth yellow curls, and she had always had a great many presents. Santa Claus had a large wax doll baby for her, held carefully on his arm, tucked up against the fur collar of his coat. He was afraid to trust it in the pack, in case it might get broken. When poor Jimmy Scarecrow saw Santa Claus, his heart gave a great leap. "Santa Claus, here I am," he cried out. But Santa Claus did not hear him. "Santa Claus, please give me a little present. I was good all summer and kept the crows out of the corn," pleaded the poor Scarecrow in a choking voice. But Santa Claus passed by with a merry halloo and a great jingle of bells. Then Jimmy Scarecrow stood in the corn stubble and shook with sobs until his joints creaked. I am of no use in the world, and everybody has forgotten me, he moaned. But he was mistaken. The next morning, Betsy sat at the window holding her Christmas doll baby, and she looked out at Jimmy Scarecrow, standing alone in the field among the corn stubble. "Aunt Hannah," said she. Aunt Hannah was making a crazy patchwork quilt, and she frowned hard at the triangular piece of red silk and a circular piece of pink, wondering how to fit them together. "Well," said she, without looking up. "Did Santa Claus bring the Scarecrow any Christmas present?" Betsy asked. "No, of course not, he didn't." "Why not?" asked Betsy. "Because he's a scarecrow. If he had been a good little girl, he would have had one," said Aunt Hannah. "He tried to be good," said Betsy, looking out at Jimmy with pity in her heart. "He kept the crows out of the corn." "I dare say," said Aunt Hannah, "but he's nothing but an old scarecrow, and of course Santa Claus wouldn't bring him anything." Betsy said no more, but she kept thinking about Jimmy Scarecrow. All that day, her mind was full of him, and that night, when she went to bed, she could see him through the window, standing alone in the moonlight. The next morning, Betsy asked her Aunt Hannah if she might take her doll baby out to see Jimmy Scarecrow. "It's too cold," said Aunt Hannah. "Do be sensible, Betsy. What a child you are." But Betsy was tender-hearted and could not bear to think of Jimmy standing there with no Christmas at all. So, when Aunt Hannah's back was turned, Betsy slipped on her little red hood and coat, hugged her new doll baby close, and ran out across the snowy field. Jimmy Scarecrow saw her coming, and his heart gave a faint little stir of hope. Betsy trudged through the snow until she reached him, and stood looking up into his painted face. "Merry Christmas, Jimmy Scarecrow," she said softly. "Thank you," said Jimmy, in a voice that trembled a little. "I wish I could wish you the same, but I haven't had any Christmas at all." Betsy held up her doll baby. "See my beautiful present that Santa Claus brought me," she said. "Isn't she lovely? But I think Santa Claus forgot you, Jimmy." "Yes," said Jimmy sadly. "He forgot me." Betsy looked very thoughtful for a moment. "Would you like my doll baby to hold for a little while?" she asked gently, "to make you feel as if you had a Christmas?" Jimmy's whole body seemed to brighten. "Oh, if I might, if I only might," he cried, though his voice was only a whisper of the cold wind. Betsy put her doll baby carefully into Jimmy Scarecrow's stiff wooden arms, then patted his sleeve. "There," she said lovingly. "Now you have something for Christmas too." Then she kissed her hand to him and ran back to the house, her little boots crunching over the snow. Jimmy Scarecrow stood motionless, holding the doll baby. For the first time that winter, he felt a soft warmth in his lonely heart. That night, it snowed hard, and the next morning, the snow was piled up almost to Jimmy Scarecrow's waist. But he stood there patiently, holding the doll baby, as carefully as if he had been made of flesh and blood. Betsy watched him from the window and felt quite happy, thinking that Jimmy now had a Christmas present like she did. But Aunt Hannah did not seem pleased. "Betsy," she said, "I'm going to send that wax doll baby back to the shop. It is not suitable for you. It is too large and much too expensive." "Oh, Aunt Hannah," cried Betsy, bursting into tears, "please don't take my doll baby away." "I don't think it is at all suitable for a child of your size," said Aunt Hannah firmly. You will have to have something smaller." Betsy sobbed and clung to the doll, but Aunt Hannah shook her head. "You may play with it today," she said, "but tomorrow it goes back." Betsy cried herself to sleep that night, but Jimmy Scarecrow, out in the moonlit field, stood holding the doll baby in his stiff arms, wishing with all his heart that he could comfort Betsy. The next morning, Aunt Hannah dressed herself in her best bonnet and shawl, took the doll baby from Betsy's reluctant arms, and set off for the village shop to return it. Betsy watched from the window, crying softly, while Jimmy Scarecrow stood silently in the snowy field, feeling more sorrow for Betsy than for himself. That evening, just at dusk, Aunt Hannah came home with a smaller doll baby for Betsy. It was a very pretty little doll, but Betsy did not love it as she had loved the larger one. As soon as Aunt Hannah's back was turned, Betsy put on her hood and coat once more and slipped out into the snowy field. She carried the smaller doll baby in her arms. Jimmy Scarecrow saw her coming, and his heart gave a gentle flutter. "Jimmy," said Betsy softly, "Aunt Hannah took my big doll baby back, but she bought me this little one instead. It's pretty, but I don't love it as much. I want you to have it. Then you won't be lonely anymore." She held up the little doll baby to Jimmy Scarecrow. "For me?" he whispered, with a kind of hushed wonder. "Yes," said Betsy. "You may keep it always." Jimmy Scarecrow took the little doll baby into his stiff arms. He was so grateful he could not speak for a moment. "Oh, thank you," he said at last, very softly. "Thank you." Betsy kissed her hand to him again, then turned and ran back to the house through the snow. Jimmy Scarecrow stood there in the moonlight, holding the little doll baby close. He felt happier than he had ever felt in all his life. The winter passed. The snow melted from the fields. The robins and bluebirds came, and one day the farmer plowed up the cornfield where Jimmy Scarecrow had stood. The little winds of spring blew about him, and the warm rains fell. Jimmy Scarecrow still held the little doll baby in his arms, for he loved it dearly. One day, Aunt Hannah said to Betsy, "I don't know what we're going to do with that old Scarecrow. He is in the way out there in the field. The corn is all planted, and we don't need him anymore. He looks dreadful. I think he ought to be burned up." "Oh, Aunt Hannah, don't burn poor Jimmy Scarecrow," cried Betsy, bursting into tears again. "He isn't dreadful. He's kind. He comforted me when the big doll baby was taken away. Oh, please don't burn Jimmy Scarecrow." "Well," said Aunt Hannah, "we must do something with him. He must not stay in that field." Betsy thought for a moment, her little face full of earnest concern. "Why can't we let him stay out there all summer, Aunt Hannah? The crows may come again," she said. "No, they won't," said Aunt Hannah. "I have put up shiny windmills in the cornfield, and that will be enough to keep the crows away." Betsy looked out of the window at Jimmy Scarecrow with a troubled heart. She could not bear to think of anything happening to him. That night, Betsy could not sleep for thinking of Jimmy Scarecrow. She got up softly, put on her little red hood and coat once more, and slipped out into the warm spring night. The moon was shining, and there were soft, damp smells of earth and grass. Betsy ran across the field to Jimmy Scarecrow. "Jimmy," she whispered, Aunt Hannah says you can't stay here in the field any longer. She says you look dreadful and must be burned up. But I won't let her do that. I will help you. Don't be afraid." Jimmy Scarecrow trembled a little, but not with fear. He was so touched by Betsy's love for him. "Thank you, dear Betsy," he said softly. "I don't mind what happens to me, but I do not want to be parted from my little doll baby." Betsy looked up at him with a brave little nod. "You shall not be burned up," she said. "I will think of something." She kissed her hand to Jimmy and hurried back to the house, her heart full of determination. The next day, Betsy's father came to the door with a letter in his hand. "Hannah," he said, "my sister in the city writes that she wants a scarecrow to stand in her garden. She says a scarecrow will keep the cats from prowling among her flower beds at night. Shall we send Jimmy Scarecrow to her?" "At once," said Aunt Hannah with great satisfaction. "That is the very thing to do." When Betsy heard this, she ran to Jimmy Scarecrow in the field. "Jimmy," she shouted joyfully, "you are not to be burned up. You are going to live in a beautiful garden in the city." Jimmy Scarecrow's whole body seemed to shine with happiness. The next morning, the farmer took Jimmy Scarecrow down, little doll baby and all, and carried him to the station to be sent to the city. Betsy stood by, smiling through her tears. She was glad Jimmy was not to be burned, yet she knew she would miss him dearly. Jimmy Scarecrow had never taken a journey before, and it seemed very wonderful to him. He had often seen the train go rushing past the fields, leaving a white trail of smoke behind, but he had never dreamed of riding on it himself. When he reached the city, Betsy's aunt received him with great delight. She set him up in her garden near some rose bushes, and little Jimmy Scarecrow stood there, holding the doll baby carefully and feeling very proud to be of use once more. The city was a strange place to him, with its tall houses, busy streets, and shining windows, but the nights in the garden were peaceful, and the moonlight fell softly on the flowers, and Jimmy Scarecrow felt content. The cats were rather startled at first by this new figure in the garden, with its still face and outstretched arms, but after a while they grew used to him and would sometimes sit near his feet, blinking at him in the moonlight. Jimmy Scarecrow never stirred, and they soon learned that he meant no harm. Still, Jimmy Scarecrow was happier than he had ever been since the first winter. He loved his little doll baby dearly, and he often thought of Betsy, with her smooth yellow curls and kind little heart. The summer passed, and autumn came again. The garden was full of bright leaves, and the wind rustled softly through the dry branches. One day, Betsy's aunt came out to the garden, looked at Jimmy Scarecrow and said, "Why, you look quite shabby, Jimmy. The wind and rain have worn you a good deal. I think, after Christmas, we must make a new scarecrow for the garden." Jimmy Scarecrow heard these words, and his heart sank. He remembered the winter before, and how cold and lonely it had been. He remembered how his joints had creaked, and how the snow had piled around him, and he trembled at the thought of being useless again. "Oh dear," he whispered softly to the little doll baby in his arms. "If only I might be of use all the year round, I would be content." Christmas drew near, and Jimmy Scarecrow thought of Betsy. He wondered if she would remember him. He longed to see her once more, but he did not dare to hope. One evening, just at twilight, a little figure in a red hood and cloak came into the garden. It was Betsy. She had come to visit her aunt for Christmas, and the first thing she had done was to run out to the garden to find Jimmy Scarecrow. "Jimmy," she cried softly, running up to him. "I knew you'd be here. Oh, Jimmy, I've missed you so." Jimmy Scarecrow felt such joy that it seemed as if his wooden heart would burst with happiness. "And I have my little doll baby still," he whispered. "I have taken such care of her." Betsy reached up on tiptoe and kissed his painted cheek. "Merry Christmas, Jimmy Scarecrow," said Betsy again, and then she stood looking at him with shining eyes. "Jimmy," she said softly, "I have come to ask Auntie if you may come back with me and live in our garden. Then you won't ever have to be burned up or thrown away or be lonely again. You shall live with us always." Jimmy Scarecrow could hardly believe such happiness. "Oh, if I might," he whispered, "if I might only be with you, Betsy, and never be useless any more." Betsy ran back to the house and talked long with her aunt and her father. They all thought it over, and at last they said yes. Jimmy Scarecrow might go back with Betsy and stand in their garden for as many years as he lasted. The next morning, Jimmy Scarecrow was taken down once more, still holding the little doll baby in his arms, and placed in the carriage beside Betsy. Together, they rode back to the dear little farmhouse where Betsy lived. Betsy stood him up in a sunny corner of the garden, close to a rose bush, where he could see the house and the children playing, and where she could visit him every day. And there, Jimmy Scarecrow lived happily, winter and summer, for many, many years. He never felt lonely again. He held fast his little doll baby, kept his kind watch over the garden and the flowers, and never forgot that happy Christmas when Betsy remembered him. And every Christmas morning, Betsy would run out to him with a kiss and whisper, "Merry Christmas, Jimmy Scarecrow." Once upon a time, a long time ago, far away across the great ocean, in a country called Germany, there could be seen a small log hut on the edge of a great forest, whose fir trees extended for miles and miles to the north. This little house, made of heavy logs, had but one room in it. A rough pine door gave entrance to this room, and a small square window admitted the light. At the back of the house was built an old-fashioned stone chimney, out of which in winter usually curled a thin blue smoke, showing that there was not very much fire within. Small as the house was, it was large enough for the two people who lived in it. I want to tell you a story today about these two people. One was an old, gray-haired woman, so old that the little children of the village, nearly half a mile away, often wondered whether she had come into the world with the huge mountains and the great fir trees which stood like giants back of her small hut. Her face was wrinkled all over with deep lines, which, if the children could only have read aright, would have told them of many years of cheerful, happy self-sacrifice, of loving, anxious watching beside sick beds, of quiet endurance of pain, of many a day of hunger and cold, and of 1,000 deeds of unselfish love for other people. But, of course, they could not read this strange handwriting. They only knew that she was old and wrinkled, and that she stooped as she walked. None of them seemed to fear her, for her smile was always cheerful, and she had a kindly word for each of them if they chanced to meet her on her way to and from the village. With this old woman lived a very little girl. So bright and happy was she that the travelers who passed by the lonesome little house on the edge of the forest often thought of a sunbeam as they saw her. These two people were known in the village as Granny Goodyear and Little Gretchen. The winter had come, and the frost had snapped off many of the smaller branches from the pine trees in the forest. Gretchen and her granny were up by daybreak each morning. After their simple breakfast of oatmeal, Gretchen would run to the little closet and fetch Granny's old woolen shawl, which seemed almost as old as Granny herself. Gretchen always claimed the right to put the shawl over her Granny's head, even though she had to climb onto the wooden bench to do it. After carefully pinning it under Granny's chin, she gave her a goodbye kiss, and Granny started out for her morning's work in the forest. This work was nothing more nor less than the gathering up of the twigs and branches which the autumn winds and winter frosts had thrown up upon the ground. These were carefully gathered into a large bundle, which Granny tied together with a strong linen band. She then managed to lift the bundle to her shoulder and trudged off to the village with it. Here she sold the bundles for kindling wood to the people of the village. Sometimes she would only get a few pence each day, and sometimes a dozen or more. But on this money, little Gretchen and she managed to live. They had their home, and the forest kindly furnished the wood for the fire, which kept them warm in cold weather. In the summertime, Granny had a little garden at the back of the hut where she raised, with little Gretchen's help, a few potatoes and turnips and onions. These she carefully stored away for winter use. To this meager supply, the pennies gained by selling the twigs from the forest added the oatmeal for Gretchen and a little black coffee for Granny. Meat was a thing they never thought of having. It cost too much money. Still, Granny and Gretchen were very happy because they loved each other dearly. Sometimes Gretchen would be left alone all day long in the hut because Granny would have some work to do in the village after selling her bundle of sticks and twigs. It was during these long days that little Gretchen had taught herself to sing the song which the wind sang to the pine branches. In the summertime, she learned the chirp and twitter of the birds until her voice might almost be mistaken for a bird's voice. She learned to dance as the swaying shadows did, and even to talk to the stars, which shone through the little square window when Granny came home too late or too tired to talk. Sometimes, when the weather was fine, or her Granny had an extra bundle of newly knitted stockings to take to the village, she would let little Gretchen go along with her. It chanced that one of these trips to the town came just the week before Christmas, and Gretchen's eyes were delighted by the sight of the lovely Christmas trees which stood in the window of the village store. It seemed to her that she would never tire of looking at the knit dolls, the woolly lambs, the little wooden shops with their strange, painted men and women in them, and all the other fine things. She had never owned a plaything in her whole life, therefore toys, which you and I would not think much of, seemed to her to be very beautiful. That night, after their supper of baked potatoes was over, and little Gretchen had cleared away the dishes and swept up the hearth because Granny dear was so tired, she brought her own small wooden stool and placed it very near Granny's feet and sat down upon it, folding her hands on her lap. Granny knew that this meant she wanted to talk about something, so she smilingly laid away the large Bible which she had been reading and took up her knitting, which was as much as to say, "Well, Gretchen, dear Granny is ready to listen." "Granny," said Gretchen slowly, "it's almost Christmas time, isn't it?" "Yes, dearie," said Granny, "only 5 more days now." And then she sighed, but little Gretchen was so happy that she did not notice Granny's sigh. "What do you think, Granny, I'll get this Christmas?" said she, looking up eagerly in Granny's face. "Ah, child, child," said Granny, shaking her head. "You'll have no Christmas this year. We are too poor for that." "Oh, but Granny," interrupted little Gretchen, "think of all the beautiful toys we saw in the village today. Surely Santa Claus has sent enough for every little child." "Ah, dearie," said Granny, "those toys are for people who can pay for them, and we have no money to spend for Christmas toys." "Well, Granny," said Gretchen, "perhaps some of the little children who live in the great house on the hill at the other end of the village will be willing to share some of their toys with me. They will be so glad to give some to a little girl who has none." "Dear child," said Granny, leaning forward and stroking the soft, shiny hair of the little girl, "your heart is full of love. You would be glad to bring a Christmas to every child, but their heads are so full of what they're going to get that they forget all about anybody else but themselves." Then she sighed and shook her head. "Well, Granny," said Gretchen, her bright, happy tone of voice growing a little less joyous, "perhaps the dear Santa Claus will show some of the village children how to make presents that do not cost money, and some of them may surprise me Christmas morning with a present. And, Granny dear," added she, springing up from her low stool, "can't I gather some of the pine branches and take them to the old sick man who lives in the house by the mill, so that he can have the sweet smell of our pine forest in his room all Christmas Day?" "Yes, dearie," said Granny, "you may do what you can to make the Christmas bright and happy, but you must not expect any present yourself." "Oh, but Granny," said little Gretchen, her face brightening, "you forget all about the shining Christmas angels who came down to earth and sang their wonderful song the night the beautiful Christ child was born. They are so loving and good that they will not forget any little child. I shall ask my dear stars tonight to tell them of us. You know," she added, with a look of relief, "the stars are so very high that they must know the angels quite well, as they come and go with their messages from the loving God." Granny sighed as she half whispered, "Poor child," but Gretchen threw her arm around Granny's neck and gave her a hearty kiss, saying as she did so, "Oh, Granny, you don't talk to the stars often enough, else you wouldn't be sad at Christmas time." Then she danced all around the room, whirling her little skirts about her to show Granny how the wind had made the snow dance that day. She looked so droll and funny that Granny forgot her cares and worries and laughed with little Gretchen over her new snow dance. The days passed on, and the morning before Christmas Eve came. Gretchen, having tidied up her little room, for Granny had taught her to be a very careful little housewife, was off to the forest, singing a bird-like song, almost as happy and free as the birds themselves. She was very busy that day, preparing a surprise for Granny. First, however, she gathered the most beautiful of the fir branches within her reach to take to the next morning to the old sick man who lived by the mill. The day was all too short for the happy little girl. When Granny came trudging wearily home that night, she found the frame of the doorway covered with green pine branches. "It's to welcome you, Granny. It's to welcome you," cried Gretchen. "Our old dear home wanted to give you a Christmas welcome. Don't you see? The branches of evergreen make it look as if it were smiling all over, and it is trying to say a happy Christmas to you, Granny." Granny laughed and kissed the little girl as they opened the door and went in together. Here was a new surprise for Granny. The 4 posts of the wooden bed, which stood in one corner of the room, had been trimmed by the busy little fingers with smaller and more flexible branches of the pine trees. A small bouquet of red mountain ash berries stood at each side of the fireplace, and these, together with the trimmed posts of the bed, gave the plain old room quite a festive look. Gretchen laughed and clapped her hands and danced about until the house seemed full of music to poor tired Granny, whose heart had been sad as she turned toward their home that night, thinking of the disappointment which must come to loving little Gretchen the next morning. After supper was over, little Gretchen drew her stool up to Granny's side and, laying her soft little hands on Granny's knee, asked to be told once again the story of the coming Christ child, how the night that he was born, the beautiful angels had sung their wonderful song, and how the whole sky had become bright with strange and glorious light, never seen by the people of earth before. Gretchen had heard the story many, many times before, but she never grew tired of it. And now that Christmas Eve had come again, the happy little child wanted to hear it once more. When Granny had finished telling it, the two sat quiet and silent for a little while thinking it over. Then Granny rose and said that it was time for them to go to bed. She slowly took off her heavy wooden shoes, such as are worn in that country, and placed them beside the hearth. Gretchen looked thoughtfully at them for a minute or two, and then she said, "Granny, don't you think that somebody in all this wide world will think of us tonight?" "Nay, Gretchen," said Granny, "I don't think anyone will." "Well then, Granny," said Gretchen, "the Christmas angels will. I know. So I am going to take one of your wooden shoes and put it on the windowsill outside, so that they may see it as they pass by. I am sure the stars will tell the Christmas angels where the shoe is." "Ah, you foolish, foolish child," said Granny. "You are only getting ready for disappointment. Tomorrow morning there will be nothing whatever in the shoe, I can tell you that now." But little Gretchen would not listen. She only shook her head and cried out, "Oh, Granny, you don't talk enough to the stars." With this, she seized the shoe and, opening the door, hurried out to place it on the windowsill. It was very dark without, and something soft and cold seemed to gently kiss her hair and face. Gretchen knew by this that it was snowing, and she looked up to the sky, anxious to see if the stars were in sight, but a strong wind was tumbling the dark, heavy snow clouds about and had shut away all else. "Never mind," said Gretchen softly to herself. "The stars are up there, even if I can't see them, and the Christmas angels do not mind snowstorms." Just then, a rough wind went sweeping by the little girl, whispering something to her which she could not understand. And then it made a sudden rush up to the snow clouds and parted them, so that the deep, mysterious sky appeared beyond, and shining down out of the midst of it was Gretchen's favorite star. "Ah, little star, said the child, laughing aloud. "I knew you were there, though I couldn't see you. Will you whisper to the Christmas angels as they come by that little Gretchen, wants so very much to have a Christmas gift tomorrow morning, if they have one to spare, and that she has put one of Granny's shoes upon the windowsill ready for it. A moment more, and the little girl, standing on tiptoe, had reached the windowsill and placed the shoe upon it, and was back again in the house beside Granny and the warm fire. The two went quietly to bed, and that night, as little Gretchen knelt to pray to the Heavenly Father, she thanked Him for having sent the Christ child into the world to teach all mankind how to be loving and unselfish. And in a few moments, she was quietly sleeping, dreaming of the Christmas angels. The next morning, very early, even before the sun was up, little Gretchen was awakened by the sound of sweet music coming from the village. She listened for a moment, and then she knew that the choir boys were singing the Christmas carols in the open air of the village street. She sprang up out of bed and began to dress herself as quickly as possible, singing as she dressed. While Granny was slowly putting on her clothes, little Gretchen, having finished dressing herself, unfastened the door and hurried out to see what the Christmas angels had left in the old wooden shoe. The white snow covered everything: trees, stumps, roads, and pastures, until the whole world looked like fairyland. Gretchen climbed up on a large stone which was beneath the window and carefully lifted down the wooden shoe. The snow tumbled off of it in a shower over the little girl's hands, but she did not heed that. She ran hurriedly back into the house, putting her hand into the toe of the shoe as she ran. "Oh, Granny! Oh, Granny!" she exclaimed. "You didn't believe the Christmas angels would think about us. But see, they have! They have! Here is a dear little bird nestled down in the toe of your shoe. Oh, isn't he beautiful?" Granny came forward and looked at what the child was holding lovingly in her hand. There she saw a tiny chickadee, whose wing was evidently broken by the rough and boisterous winds of the night before, and who had taken shelter in the safe, dry toe of the old wooden shoe. She gently took the little bird out of Gretchen's hands and skillfully bound his broken wing to his side so that he need not hurt himself by trying to fly with it. Then she showed Gretchen how to make a nice warm nest for the little stranger close beside the fire, and when their breakfast was ready, she let Gretchen feed the little bird with a few moist crumbs. Later in the day, Gretchen carried the fresh green boughs to the old sick man by the mill, and on her way home stopped to see and enjoy the Christmas toys of some other children whom she knew, never once wishing that they were hers. When she reached home, she found that the little bird had gone to sleep. Soon, however, he opened his eyes and stretched his head up, saying just as plain as a bird can say, "Now, my new friends, I want you to give me something more to eat." Gretchen gladly fed him again, and then, holding him in her lap, she softly and gently stroked his gray feathers until the little creature seemed to lose all fear of her. That evening, Granny taught her a Christmas hymn and told her another beautiful Christmas story. Then Gretchen made up a funny little story to tell to the birdie. He winked his eyes and turned his head from side to side in such a droll fashion that Gretchen laughed until the tears came. As Granny and she got ready for bed that night, Gretchen put her arms softly around Granny's neck and whispered, "What a beautiful Christmas we had today, Granny. Is there anything in the world more lovely than Christmas?" There was once in a faraway country where few people have ever traveled a wonderful church. It stood on a high hill in the midst of a great city, and every Sunday, as well as on sacred days like Christmas, thousands of people climbed the hill to its great archways, looking like lines of ants all moving in the same direction. When you came to the building itself, you found stone columns and dark passages and a grand entrance leading to the main room of the church. This room was so long that one standing at the doorway could scarcely see to the other end, where the choir stood by the marble altar. In the farthest corner was the organ, and this organ was so loud that sometimes when it played, the people for miles around would close their shutters and prepare for a great thunderstorm. Altogether, no such church as this was ever seen before, especially when it was lighted up for some festival and crowded with people, young and old. But the strangest thing about the whole building was the wonderful chime of bells. At one corner of the church was a great gray tower with ivy growing over it as far up as one could see. I say as far as one could see because the tower was quite great enough to fit the great church, and it rose so far into the sky that it was only in very fair weather that anyone claimed to be able to see the top. Even then, one could not be certain that it was in sight. Up and up and up climbed the stones and the ivy, and as the men who built the church had been dead for hundreds of years, everyone had forgotten how high the tower was supposed to be. Now, all the people knew that at the top of the tower was a chime of Christmas bells. They had hung there ever since the church had been built and were the most beautiful bells in the world. Some thought it was because a great musician had cast them and arranged them in their place. Others said it was because of the great height, which reached up where the air was clearest and purest. However, that might be, no one who had ever heard the chimes denied that they were the sweetest in the world. Some described them as sounding like angels far up in the sky. Others as sounding like strange winds singing through the trees. But the fact was that no one had heard them for years and years. There was an old man living not far from the church who said that his mother had spoken of hearing them when she was a little girl, and he was 115, and he was the only one who was sure of as much as that. They were Christmas chimes, you see, and were not meant to be played by men or on common days. It was the custom on Christmas Eve for all the people to bring to the church their offerings to the Christ child. And when the greatest and best offering was laid on the altar, there used to come sounding through the music of the choir the Christmas chimes far up in the tower. Some said that the wind rang them, and others that they were so high that the angels could set them swinging. But for many long years they had never been heard. It was said that people had been growing less careful of their gifts for the Christ child, and that no offering was brought great enough to deserve the music of the chimes. Every Christmas Eve, the rich people still crowded to the altar, each one trying to bring some better gift than any other, without giving anything that he wanted for himself, and the church was crowded with those who thought that perhaps the wonderful bells might be heard again. But although the service was splendid and the offerings plenty, only the roar of the wind could be heard far up in the stone tower. Now, a number of miles from the city, in a little country village where nothing could be seen of the great church but glimpses of the tower when the weather was fine, lived a boy named Pedro and his little brother. They knew very little about the Christmas chimes, but they had heard of the service in the church on Christmas Eve and had a secret plan, which they had often talked over when by themselves, to go to see the beautiful celebration. "Nobody can guess, little brother," Pedro would say, "all the fine things there are to see and hear. And I have heard it said that the Christ child sometimes comes down to bless the service. What if we could see him?" The day before Christmas was bitterly cold, with a few lonely snowflakes flying in the air and a hard white crust on the ground. Sure enough, Pedro and little brother were able to slip quietly away early in the afternoon, and although the walking was hard in the frosty air, before nightfall they had trudged so far, hand in hand, that they saw the lights of the big city just ahead of them. Indeed, they were about to enter one of the great gates in the wall that surrounded it when they saw something dark on the snow near their path and stepped aside to look at it. It was a poor woman who had fallen just outside the city, too sick and tired to get in where she might have found shelter. The soft snow made a drift of sort of a pillow for her, and she would soon be so sound asleep in the wintry air that no one could ever waken her again. All this Pedro saw in a moment, and he knelt down beside her and tried to rouse her, even tugging at her arm a little, as though he would have tried to carry her away. He turned her face toward him so that he could rub some of the snow on it, and when he had looked at her silently a moment, he stood up again and said, "It's no use, little brother. You will have to go on alone." "Alone?" cried little brother. "And you not see the Christmas festival?" "No," said Pedro, and he could not keep back a bit of a choking sound in his throat. "See this poor woman? Her face looks like the Madonna in the chapel window, and she will freeze to death if nobody cares for her. Everyone has gone to the church now, but when you come back, you can bring someone to help her. I will rub her to keep her from freezing, and perhaps get her to eat the bun that is left in my pocket." "But I cannot bear to leave you and go on alone," said the little brother. "Both of us need not miss the service," said Pedro, "and it had better be I than you. You can easily find your way to church, and you must see and hear everything twice, little brother, once for you and once for me. I am sure the Christ child must know how I should love to come with you and worship him, and oh, if you get a chance, little brother, to slip up to the altar without getting in anyone's way, take this little silver piece of mine and lay it down for my offering when no one is looking. Do not forget where you have left me, and forgive me for not going with you." In this way, he hurried little brother off to the city and winked hard to keep back the tears as he heard the crunching footsteps sounding farther and farther away in the twilight. It was pretty hard to lose the music and splendor of the Christmas celebration that he had been planning for so long and spend time instead in that lonely place in the snow. The great church was a wonderful place that night. Everyone said that it had never looked so bright and beautiful before. When the organ played and the thousands of people sang, the walls shook with the sound, and little Pedro, away outside the city wall, felt the earth tremble around him. At the close of the service came the procession with the offerings to be laid on the altar. Rich men and great men marched proudly up to lay down their gifts to the Christ child. Some brought wonderful jewels, some baskets of gold so heavy that they could scarcely carry them down the aisle. a great writer laid down a book that he had been making for years and years. And last of all walked the king of the country, hoping with all the rest to win for himself the chime of the Christmas bells. There went a great murmur through the church as the people saw the king take from his head the royal crown, all set with precious stones, and laying it gleaming on the altar as his offering to the Holy Child. "Surely," everyone said, "we shall hear the bells now, for nothing like this has ever happened before." But still, only the cold old wind was heard in the tower, and the people shook their heads, and some of them said, as they had before, that they never really believed the story of the chimes, and doubted if they ever rang at all. The procession was over, and the choir began the closing hymn. Suddenly, the organist stopped playing, and everyone looked at the old minister who was standing by the altar, holding up his hand for silence. Not a sound could be heard from anyone in the church, but as all the people strained their ears to listen, there came softly, but distinctly, swinging through the air, the sound of the chimes in the tower. So far away, and yet so clear the music seemed. So much sweeter were the notes than anything that had been heard before. Rising and falling away up there in the sky, that the people in the church sat for a moment, as still as though something held each of them by the shoulders. Then they all stood up together and stared straight at the altar to see what great gift had awakened the long silent bells. But all that the nearest of them saw was the childish figure of little brother, who had crept softly down the aisle when no one was looking, and had laid Pedro's little piece of silver on the altar. Only 2 more days and Christmas would be here. It had been snowing hard, and Johnny was standing at the window, looking at the soft white snow which covered the ground half a foot deep. Presently, he heard the noise of wheels coming up the road, and a wagon turned in at the gate and came past the window. Johnny was very curious to know what the wagon could be bringing. He pressed his little nose close to the cold window pane, and to his great surprise, saw 2 large Christmas trees. Johnny wondered why there were 2 Christmas trees, and turned quickly to run and tell Mama all about it, but then remembered that Mama was not at home. She had gone to the city to buy some Christmas presents and would not return until quite late. Johnny began to feel that his toes and fingers had grown quite cold from standing at the window so long. So he drew his own little chair up to the cheerful grate fire and sat there quietly thinking. Kitty, who had been curled up like a little bundle of wool in the very warmest corner, jumped up and, going to Johnny, rubbed her head against his knee to attract his attention. He patted her gently and began to talk to her about what was in his thoughts. He had been puzzling over the 2 trees which had come, and at last had made up his mind about them. "I know now, Kitty," said he, "why there are 2 trees. This morning when I kissed Papa goodbye at the gate, he said he was going to buy one for me, and Mama, who was busy in the house, did not hear him say so, and I'm sure she must have bought the other. But what shall we do with 2 Christmas trees?" Kitty jumped into his lap and purred and purred. A plan suddenly flashed into Johnny's mind. "Would you like to have one, Kitty?" Kitty purred more loudly, and it seemed almost as though she had said yes. "Oh, I will, if Mama will let me. I'll have a Christmas tree out in the barn for you, Kitty, and for all the pets, and then you'll be as happy as I shall be with my tree in the parlor." By this time, it had grown quite late. There was a ring at the doorbell, and quick as a flash, Johnny ran, with happy, smiling face, to meet Papa and Mama and give them each a loving kiss. During the evening, he told them all that he had done that day, and also about the 2 big trees which the man had brought. It was just as Johnny had thought. Papa and Mama had each bought one, and as it was so near Christmas, they decided not to send either of them back. Johnny was very glad of this, and told them of the happy plan he had made and asked if he might have the extra tree. Papa and Mama smiled a little as Johnny explained his plan, but they said he might have the tree, and Johnny went to bed feeling very happy. That night, his papa fastened the tree into a block of wood so that it would stand firmly, and then set it in the middle of the barn floor. The next day, when Johnny had finished his lessons, he went to the kitchen and asked Annie, the cook, if she would save some bones and potato parings and all the other leavings from the day's meals and give them to him the following morning. He also begged her to give him several cupfuls of salt and cornmeal, which she did, putting them in paper bags for him. Then she gave him the dishes he asked for, a few chipped ones, not good enough to be used at table, and an old wooden bowl. Annie wanted to know what Johnny intended to do with all these things, but he only said, "Wait until tomorrow, then you shall see." He gathered up all the things which the cook had given him and carried them to the barn, placing them on a shelf in one corner, where he was sure no one would touch them, and where they would all be ready for him to use the next morning. Christmas morning came, and, as soon as he could, Johnny hurried out to the barn, where stood the Christmas tree which he was going to trim for all his pets. The first thing he did was to get a paper bag of oats. This he tied to one of the branches of the tree for Brownie the mare. Then he made up several bundles of hay and tied these on the other side of the tree, not quite so high up, where Whiteface, the cow, could reach them, and on the lowest branches some more hay for Spotty, the calf. Next, Johnny hurried to the kitchen to get the things Annie had promised to save for him. She had plenty to give. With his arms and hands full, he went back to the barn. He found 3 lovely bones with plenty of meat on them. These he tied together to another branch of the tree for Rover, his big black dog. Under the tree, he placed the big wooden bowl and filled it well with potato parings, rice, and meat left from yesterday's dinner. This was the full and tempting trough for Piggywig. Near this, he placed a bowl of milk for Kitty. On one plate, the salt for the pet lamb, and on another, the cornmeal for the dear little chickens. On the top of the tree, he tied a basket of nuts. These were for his pet squirrel, and I had almost forgotten to tell you of the bunch of carrots tied very low, where soft white Bunny could reach them. When all was done, Johnny stood off a little way to look at this wonderful Christmas tree, clapping his hands with delight. He ran to call Papa and Mama and Annie, and they laughed aloud when they saw what he had done. It was the funniest Christmas tree they'd ever seen. They were sure the pets would like the presents Johnny had chosen. Then there was a busy time in the barn. Papa and Mama and Annie helped about bringing in the animals, and before long, Brownie, Whiteface, Spotty, Rover, Piggywig, Kitty, Lambkin, the chickens, the squirrel, and Bunny had been led each to his own Christmas breakfast on and under the tree. What a funny sight it was to see them all standing around looking happy and contented, eating and drinking with such an appetite. While watching them, Johnny had another thought, and he ran quickly to the house and brought out the new trumpet which Papa had given him for Christmas. By this time, the animals had all finished their breakfast, and Johnny gave a little toot on his trumpet as a signal that the tree festival was over. Brownie went, neighing and prancing, to her stall. Whiteface walked demurely off with a bellow, which Spotty, the calf, running at her heels, tried to imitate. The little lamb skipped bleating away. Piggywig walked off with a grunt. Kitty jumped on the fence with a mew. The squirrel still sat up in the tree cracking her nuts. Bunny hopped to her snug little quarters, while Rover, barking loudly, chased the chickens back to their coop. Such a hub-hub of noises. Mama said it sounded as if they were trying to say, "Merry Christmas to you, Johnny. Merry Christmas to all." "Come now, my dear little stars," said Mother Moon, "and I will tell you the Christmas story." Every morning for a week before Christmas, Mother Moon used to call all the little stars around her and tell them a story. It was always the same story, but the stars never wearied of it. It was the story of the Christmas star, the Star of Bethlehem. When Mother Moon had finished the story, the little stars always said, "And the star is shining still, isn't it, Mother Moon, even if we can't see it?" And Mother Moon would answer, "Yes, my dears, only now it shines for men's hearts instead of their eyes." Then the stars would bid the Mother Moon good night and put on their little blue nightcaps and go to bed in the sky chamber. For the stars' bedtime is when people down on the earth are beginning to waken and see that it is morning. But that particular morning, when the little stars said good night and went quietly away, one golden star still lingered beside Mother Moon. "What is the matter, my little star?" asked the Mother Moon. "Why don't you go with your little sisters?" "Oh, Mother Moon," said the golden star, "I am so sad. I wish I could shine for someone's heart like that star of wonder that you tell us about." "Why, aren't you happy up here in the sky country?" asked Mother Moon. "Yes, I have been very happy," said the star. "But tonight, it seems just as if I must find some heart to shine for." "Then, if that is so," said Mother Moon, "the time has come, my little star, for you to go through the Wonder Entry." "The Wonder Entry? What is that?" asked the star. But the Mother Moon made no answer. Rising, she took the little star by the hand and led it to a door that it had never seen before. The Mother Moon opened the door, and there was a long, dark entry. At the far end was shining a little speck of light. "What is this?" asked the star. "It is the Wonder Entry, and it is through this that you must go to find the heart where you belong," said the Mother Moon. Then the little star was afraid. It longed to go through the entry as it never longed for anything before, and yet it was afraid and clung to the Mother Moon. But very gently, almost sadly, the Mother Moon drew her hand away. "Go, my child," she said. Then, wondering and trembling, the little star stepped into the Wonder Entry, and the door of the sky house closed behind it. The next thing the star knew, it was hanging in a toy shop with a whole row of other stars. blue and red and silver. It itself was gold. The shop smelled of evergreen and was full of Christmas shoppers, men and women and children. But of them all, the star looked at no one but a little boy standing in front of the counter, for as soon as the star saw the child, it knew that he was the one to whom it belonged. The little boy was standing beside a sweet-faced woman in a long black veil, and he was not looking at anything in particular. The star shook and trembled on the string that held it, because it was afraid lest the child would not see it, or lest if he did, he would not know it as his star. The lady had a number of toys on the counter before her, and she was saying, "Now, I think we have presents for everyone. There's the doll for Lou, and the game for Ned, and the music box for May, and the rocking horse and the sled." Suddenly, the little boy caught her by the arm. "Oh, Mother," he said. He had seen the star. "Well, what is it, darling?" asked the lady. "Oh, Mother, just see that star up there. I do wish I had it." "Oh, my dear, we have so many things for the Christmas tree," said the mother. "Yes, I know, but I do want the star," said the child. "Very well," said the mother, smiling. "Then we will take that too." So the star was taken down from the place where it hung and wrapped up in a piece of paper, and all the while it thrilled with joy, for now it belonged to the little boy. It was not until the afternoon before Christmas, when the tree was being decorated, that the golden star was unwrapped and taken out from the paper. "Here is something else," said the sweet-faced lady. "We must hang this on the tree. Paul took such a fancy to it that I had to get it for him. He will never be satisfied unless we hang it on too." "Oh yes," said someone else who was helping to decorate the tree. "We will hang it here on the very top." So the little star hung on the highest branch of the Christmas tree. That evening, all the candles were lighted on the Christmas tree, and there were so many that they fairly dazzled the eyes. And the gold and silver balls, the fairies and the glass fruits, shone and twinkled in the light, and high above them all shone the golden star. At 7 o'clock, a bell was rung, and then the folding doors of the room where the Christmas tree stood were thrown open, and a crowd of children came trooping in. They laughed and shouted and pointed, and all talked together, and after a while there was music, and presents were taken from the tree and given to the children. How different it was all from the great wide, still sky house. But the star had never been so happy in all its life, for the little boy was there. He stood apart from the other children, looking up at the star, with his hands clasped behind him, and he did not seem to care for the toys and the games. At last it was all over. The lights were put out, the children went home, and the house grew still. Then the ornaments on the tree began to talk among themselves. "So that is all over," said a silver ball. "It was very happy this evening, the happiest Christmas I remember." "Yes," said a glass bunch of grapes, "the best of it is over. Of course, people will come to look at us for several days yet, but it won't be like this evening. And then I suppose we'll be laid away for another year," said a paper fairy. "Really, it seems hardly worthwhile. Such a few days out of the year, and then to be shut up in the dark box again. I almost wish I were a paper doll." The bunch of grapes was wrong in saying that people would come to look at the Christmas tree the next few days, for it stood neglected in the library and nobody came near it. Everybody in the house went about very quietly, with anxious faces, for the little boy was ill. At last, one evening, a woman came into the room with a servant. The woman wore the cap and apron of a nurse. "That is it," she said, pointing to the golden star. The servant climbed up on some steps and took down the star and put it in the nurse's hand, and she carried it out into the hall and upstairs to a room where the little boy lay. The sweet-faced lady was sitting by the bed, and as the nurse came in, she held out her hand for the star. "Is this what you wanted, my darling?" she asked, bending over the little boy. He nodded and held out his hands for the star. As he clasped it, a wonderful shining smile came over his face, the happiest she'd ever seen. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the window, touching the golden star that lay on the table beside his bed. Its 5 points sparkled brightly in the light. And when his mother came into the room, she found the little boy sitting up, color in his cheeks and a sparkle in his eyes. He smiled at her and said softly, "I feel all better now, Mama." And though it was only a paper star, something had changed. The little star, the one he had wished upon, seemed to live inside his heart now, filling him with a quiet joy and a light that would never fade. Sweet dreams, my friend. Sleep well.